Hello and welcome. This is Lisa Jones, and you are listening to the Exploring Death podcast.
Hello and welcome. It's Lisa Jones with the Exploring Death podcast. And today I have with me Greg Magick Bernstein. For over the last 23 years, he has trained one-on-one extensively with a number of different powerful shaman, kahuna, elders, and sorcerers. He leads shamanic mystical retreats in power places around the world, such as Hawaii, Mount Shasta, and Sedona. His unique approach is to transmit and emanate an energetic field in which awakening, unconditional love, connection to spirit, and the mystical are exponentially amplified. This field facilitates the resolution of wounds and trauma and wakes people up to their true nature. Death and visiting death vortexes are often a part of his teachings and retreats. And I am thrilled to have him here because I've just spent 7 days with him on a retreat, and I can't wait to dive deeper. So welcome, Magick.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here, Lisa. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Yes, I'm thrilled. Well, part of the excitement of the retreat that we just finished is that you do take us to death vortexes, and death is really a big part of your teachings. And in fact, you're even wearing a string of mala beads, which are skulls. And so first, let's talk about that because it's so striking.
Yeah, well, I was in India last fall, and there's a city in India called Varanasi. And Varanasi is the city that represents to the Hindu culture death. And it's the place that if you actually die in Varanasi, then according to Hindu culture, then you're released from the karmic cycle of life, death, and rebirth, and you experience what they call moksha, which is the release from that. So people want to die there, and they have these, what they call burning ghats by the river, by the Ganges. And so there was one near where we stayed where they had usually about 8 dead bodies that were, well, there was usually many more than 8 dead bodies there, but there were 8 that were on fire at any given moment, being burned in a large pyre. That's part of the ceremony and the ritual that they go through there. And so I would go down there, and I'd try to get my friends to go with me, but they mostly didn't want to go with me, or they would go for just a few minutes and then they'd be done and want to leave. And I'd go down there for like hours and just sit there and meditate in the energy of death. And I could see the bodies, I could see toes actually like lit up like embers burning, and you could smell the smells. And some of the gentlemen took me down by the bodies and gave me a tour of them. And I watched them bring the bodies up and bless them and do their sacred ceremony around them. It was so powerful to witness the transition from physical into the spiritual realm, which is something that the Hawaiians honor as well. And they have death sacred sites in Hawaii, which are typically in the westernmost part of the island, the west representing death. And they call them the leaping place of the souls, or the place where the body leaves the physical realm and goes through a portal to transcend into spiritual realms. So it's a doorway. These places are powerful doorways where we can experience death before we actually physically die in these spots.
Wow, that is so powerful. Well, and I think that's the whole thing that I love about death and exploring death is that it is such it's a powerful, like you said, the portal, and that really when you accept death and bring it into your life and meditate on it and become comfortable with it, I feel like that's when you really wake up to life, because then you're not running your life in fear and, just kind of in that constant, I don't know, just kind of terror,
Exactly. I mean, I like to say to people that your relationship with death is directly proportional to your ability to fully live life. If you're afraid of death, which comes in many forms, not just the end of your physical life, but it comes in all loss, like the death of a relationship, the death of something you love, the death of a place that you lived, or your family or a friend, like the death of things that just end in terms of like completion. All of those deaths often have sadness or pain or discomfort around them. And as long as we're in resistance to that, then we're going to have an agenda of avoidance, which is going to cause us to not be in our full truth, not be in guidance with our higher self, and not living our fullest life. Because like you said, we're in fear, the fear of loss, the small losses, the small deaths all along the way, as well as the ultimate death, the end of our lives, which is the only thing, by the way, that we're guaranteed of when we're born is death.
That's right.
And lots of it, actually, not just ours, but lots of it in all these forms. So our ability to really be with that and fully accept that gives us a true freedom. In fact, I often will pre-grieve losses. So any loss that's around me that's happened, will happen, or has happened, I'm just grieving it all the time, which is simply the act of loving loss. When we love death or we love loss, then if there is grief that needs to happen or emotions that need to move, they just move. And then we find ourselves at peace and empty and free to take actions that are not based on the avoidance of death or loss.
Wow. Yeah, that's so powerful. And I love the idea about pre-grieving, because when my husband was sick for 7 years, I've always said, I was grieving that whole time. Like, it was just, I knew that at some point he was going to die. And so it was just always grieving. And because I really, after a month after he died, I took my wedding ring off and I said, okay, I'm ready to start living now, and a lot of people really kind of looked at me like, wow, that's really quick, and they were very judgmental and very, not supportive of that whole thought. And at that time I didn't care, because I had been grieving for 7 years, so I felt like, and there was still more to do. I mean, it's been 15 years and I'm still grieving, so it's an ongoing thing. But to be able to pre-grieve, it really helped me launch forward, into life again.
Absolutely. Just went through something similar myself. Could have shared the same story you just did. And there's always something to grieve, by the way. So because we have the grief that's touching our skin very closely, like the death of your husband, which you're describing, but we're all connected. We are all one giant spiritual being. And so the loss that's happening, the deaths that are happening in war-torn countries right now, and countries stricken by poverty, there's death, dying, and suffering happening right now. Millions and millions and millions, tens and probably hundreds of millions of people are suffering and or dying. That's happening. The planet is possibly in a death spiral right now. So there's lots to grieve all the time. And the more we actually grieve it, the less we're in resistance to it. We don't go into anger and frustration and start to rail against it, which isn't so useful. And we stay really centered inside of ourselves. And then we're just in divine right action. We still may take action. We still may do things, but they're coming from a very peaceful and centered and different place than we're in when we are in the reactivity of ungrieved loss.
Yes, and I think that's it right there. The reactivity is what kind of gets us out of balance and out of sync with just the way, right? I mean, it's the being in the flow of life and being with it rather than resisting it and trying to, hold it back and, so.
And death can be very overwhelming. One of my first, I guess, like awakenings to death was about 10 years ago when I lead retreats, shamanic retreats in Shasta and these different places. And I was coming up on a retreat in Shasta, and it was about a month before when I started getting this overriding, super intense feeling of like doom and death. And it was so intense. I couldn't figure out, like, am I actually going to die? Or is this like some kind of, die before you die, egoic death process that I'm in? And I just didn't know. And it was very frightening. And I just kept surrendering to the feelings and being with them and being present with them and actually loving them, and instead of running from them and trying to avoid them. And when I got north of Shasta to Ashland, there was like turkey feathers everywhere, which for some, it's in Native American cultures, it's about the giveaway and death. And I started gathering them. And then we got in the car, we were driving down to Shasta. At the border, they stop you to check for produce. And they said, by the way, you guys, if you're sensitive, you may want to close your eyes because there's been an accident and there's a dead body on the road. So as I'm crossing the border to go to California to the retreat, there's a dead body on the road. And then 5 minutes later, there's 2 dead deer. And then there's a dead owl with its wings sticking up, which we stopped and did this whole ceremony and buried. So I get there, and it was like every event that I had was a death. And eventually it culminated with this experience where I was in this meditation when all of a sudden I started feeling like I was dying. And I didn't know if I was really physically dying or not. And then I started experiencing my death. And then I started experiencing the death of everyone I know, everything I've loved, everyone I've known. I watched my eyes, my ears, my feelings, my sight, my taste, all just like die. All my hobbies, all my sports, likes, places I love, Maui, sacred sites, all were just dying, like inside of me and outside of me. I was crying hysterically. I was shaking. I was making all kinds of sounds. It was radical. And in the middle of it, I kind of realized, like, okay, so hopefully this is it. And I'm actually not dying. And then I woke up to the impermanence of the part of me, that we can go in any moment. And we often live in the illusion of permanence, the illusion that we're going to be here the next moment or the next moment or the next moment. And it keeps us putting things off in the future and not being fully present and fully alive. And I started laughing hysterically when that happened. And then I went through this whole process of like a snake being reborn. And I was like reborn in the present moment, reborn in the knowing that this is the only moment that matters. It was a really radical day of my life. And there were many other experiences during that month where I went to death sacred sites and I died, and I experienced many other versions of this. It was a month of death, and it really deepened and started my love affair with death.
Oh, I love that title, Love Affair with Death.
Yeah.
I feel like I should change my podcast to that.
Yeah, I do.
And yet, like, I guess two things are popping up for me. One is, so I know, I was going to say, I probably know what you're going to tell people, but, like, how do people deal with the grief? I mean, sit with it, right? And feel it. I mean, that's generally what your answer is to a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, it may be a little more than I can share in this podcast, but the basic, simplest, boiled down version is that our resistance to what is what creates all suffering. So when we resist the feelings that come up when we are facing any kind of loss or death, then we're going to suffer. When we actually fully feel things, when we're really allowing things to be as they are, which is actually reality, right? The reality is death is happening right now. Loss is happening. And so if I actually be fully in reality, then those feelings that are arising and all the resistance and everything, it actually can empty out of me. Like when you pull the spigot of a ice chest that's filled with some water and you pull out the little plug and the water drains out, it starts to drain out the sadness and drain out everything that's coming up around the grief. And so it's really just being with it. Now, the way to do that is what's really important, because most of us are trying to do it with our head. We're trying to think about it and process it there, and it doesn't do a darn thing to move or shift the energy. The real way to move the energy is to find where you're feeling it in your body, like track the sensations in your emotional, physical, or energetic body, and then just put all your attention and all your awareness on those sensations and leave it there. That's a form of presencing and loving yourself. And you just hold your attention there. If you're going through a big death process, it could take you hours, it could take you days, it could take you weeks or months of consistent practice like this, but this will grieve it, it will heal it, and it will return you to your natural state of peace, which you go in and out of depending on what's happening in your life, depending on loss and fear of loss.
Right.
So that's the panacea.
Wow. I love that. And just recently I got this kind of divine download about, people are always talking about, they love it when they're happy and things are going well, and they don't like it when things aren't going well and things. And then the divine said to me, look at our heartbeat, right? Our heartbeat is, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. If we are flatlined and we're trying to stay, or, then we're dead. I mean, that's what, flatline is dead. And so that's what I was like, oh my God, what a revelation. That is life, right? The ups, the downs, because if we're just flatlining and trying to stay at a certain level of consistency and without any kind of,
right. We would
experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, we rob ourselves of the richness of life. So what I find with this is that people are often measuring the quality of their lives by how they feel, right? And so because the good feelings, quote unquote, are what they feel like are happiness, and the bad feelings like sadness, anger, fear, guilt, shame, those things are considered bad. And so now they have an agenda that they're walking through life trying to accumulate the good feelings and get rid of the bad feelings. And most people at a certain level of maturity realize that that doesn't work, but they're still trying to do it because they don't know any other way. And so the secret, I guess, it's not really a secret, but it seems that way because it's not practiced so much, is to actually just fall in love with all of the feelings, to welcome everything, to be one with, to accept all that is just as it is. Doesn't mean you're not going to take divine right action. It doesn't mean you're not going to have preferences. There are little refined teachings to this, but ultimately it's just to accept things just as they are. That's being in reality. When we do that, the roller coaster ride of the ups and downs of life goes away. It doesn't mean there aren't challenges and high and low kind of experiences, but our experience of them is totally different. When I'm crying and I'm in resistance to my crying, it's terrible, it's suffering, it doesn't feel good. And it's only like emptying the steam off a pressure cooker. It doesn't change a darn thing. But when I cry and I'm fully surrendered to it, I'm in love with what's happening, I'm in love with the tears, and I'm in full acceptance of it, it actually feels really good. And it moves and heals everything, right? So everything kind of starts to have a quality of peace, a quality of suchness or isness. It just is. Whether it's something that your mind would interpret as good or your mind would interpret as bad, when you let go of that, it just becomes what is. And then you're not on a roller coaster anymore.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you have to let go of the mind, right? That's, I think, for so many of us, we're just so caught in there. So do you have any little tips or ideas about just?
Yes. What I'm going to tell you is actually the same thing that I just told you, which is how to grieve.
Yeah.
There are others, but I want to keep it simple since we have a short call right here, and just say the best practice to get out of the mind is to take your attention, which is something that you do have some control over. You don't really have much control over your mind. Like, try to control your thoughts. It doesn't last long. Most people can't even close their eyes and meditate for 1 minute without thoughts coming in that they don't want to come in. So that whole idea we can control our thoughts and not think about what we don't want to think about, it doesn't work. But what you can do is rehabituate and retrain yourself to not be in the mind as much and to not contract upon thoughts so much. Because what happens, the thoughts just coming by, but we then go, ooh, and we contract on it and we like merge with it and become one with it. And then all of a sudden it seems real. So instead, take your attention and retrain it to being on the body. And the way to do that is to track every moment, all the time. There are sensations occurring in your body. If you're listening to this and you stop for a moment and tune into your body, when I say body, I mean your energetic, physical, or emotional body, which to me is all, I just call it all your energy body. If you tap into that right now, there are sensations there. There are things happening. On a subtle energy level, there's a lot happening. On a physical level, there's a little bit happening. On an emotional level, there's always something happening. And if you tune into that and start to put your attention there and become one with that and feel that, you're not here anymore. Now, you still have access to thought from the body as well as everything else. Multidimensional reality, traveling through space and time, all kinds of psychic senses. Everything's available when you're in the body. It's your vehicle here on planet Earth, including thought when you need it. It's like a tool you can use. But when you're in the mind and you're thinking a lot, which is what most of us do, which is a way to avoid the body, because in the body are emotions and we don't want the emotions, right? So when you're just in the mind, you don't have access to the body. You don't have access to the psychic realms. You don't have access to so much information and data and power. You're really in a very narrow realm of existence when in thought. It's a little bit hard to undo because most of us have never experienced anything other than being in our thoughts. So it can be a little scary to drop into the unknown of the body, as well as to all the stored emotions and grief and history that we haven't felt, that we've been avoiding. But that's where your real power is. And that's where real, true peace and freedom lie as well.
Wow, that's so awesome. Well, one of the things, like I had mentioned, I had just done a retreat with you, which was so amazing. And you, taught us to do rituals and all sorts of amazing things. And one of the rituals, which you're really big into, is the runes, and which I love because I literally had a thought of, oh, I should bring my runes on this shamanic journey or this retreat. And then I kind of kiboshed my thought because I'm like, oh, well, I don't want to mix things in that, I just want to go with an open mind. And then sure enough, you bring them out. So I love that we were so in sync with that. So I just wanted to pull, well, first of all, I'll show people, if you're listening, you can't see this, but it's a bag, and it's filled with how many?
25.
Little, and what would you call these things? Little,
I don't know.
Little.
Those are individual. I mean, they're supposed to mimic like a stone,
right.
The runes would have been
little
carved
flat
into
stones.
Yeah.
Right. And then they've got little symbols on them. And actually, well, I guess we're going to use this one because I just pulled it. So, can you see it?
I can.
All right. So is that signals?
I think signals is the one that doesn't have the little stem on the top. So there's two that
okay,
look
wait.
very
Well,
similar.
I've got the book here, so I will look. Oh yeah, you're right. Signals is the other that goes down the other way. So possessions is what I drew. So, I mean, you're do you want me to read it, or do you have anything that comes up about possessions and what that's all about?
I would say reading it would probably might be a little much for the podcast.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Well, I was just going to get the gist of it, but if you know what the gist is.
Well, what I would say is, I'm not going to give you the gist of what's in the book. I'm going to give you what's coming up based on our
perfect.
Now,
I love it.
Possessions are something that are temporary, right? And they come and go. And a lot of people put their attention on gaining possessions. And one of the things that death teaches me, because I've had so many experiences of experiencing my own death. And may I tell you a quick story? Please
do. Yeah.
So I was at this powerful sacred site in Mount Shasta, California, called Castle Rock. And I was actually on a kayak on the lake. Not Castle Rock, sorry, Castle Lake. And I was on a kayak on the lake. And I'd been in a death site called Mud Creek Canyon. I don't know if it was the day before, but it was in the few days before. Very remote location where the shamans used to go and train. Total death site. A death site is a place where you can release something, you can complete it instantly because it's a vortex. So you can let go of a fear or a belief you've had or some kind of limitation or some way you've been in life. I mean, I went into one poor and I walked out and I released something in there that I knew was going to enable financial abundance. And 6 weeks later, I had a client give me almost $1 million. I mean, it was amazing. So these places are really potent and powerful vortexes. And so I was at Mud Creek Canyon. I'd seen a symbol literally like carved on one of the rocks that I'd never seen before, like a rune, but it wasn't a rune. And I didn't know what it was. And so a few days later, or maybe the next day, I don't recall, I was at Castle Lake on this kayak. And I've had this magical shamanic day where shape shifting and all these things had happened and fairies had visited me. And now I'm looking over at the cliff where the water meets a cliff at a 90-degree angle. And I see this symbol that I had seen and never seen before or since in the same maroon color carved on the side of this cliff. And it's never been there before and it's never been there since. Immediately, I dropped into some kind of powerful, empty space where the little me, wasn't in control anymore. And I was just being run by spirit. And I dug my oar into the ground and I was paddling as fast as I could, full speed towards this cliff face. Nope, I wasn't there. There was no personality, no me running the ship. This was just pure spirit. And when I got maybe 50 feet from it, I lifted the oar up and I crashed into it really hard and really fast. And when I crashed into it, The wall disappeared, Castle Lake disappeared, I disappeared, 2000, whatever year it was, disappeared. And I was burning at the stake in a past life. And I was sobbing, crying. And I was having memories come back of my life, like the life review that they talk about happening. And that lasted for who knows how long. And I was like in all this pain, and then boom, the scene changed. And now I was in another past life, and I was lying in a field, and I had had a heart attack, and I was a farmer, and I was dying again. And I'm sobbing, and I'm remembering my wife and my history and all this. And then another past life came in, and this happened like 4 or 5 times. And then after 4 or 5 times of this, and what felt like an eternity, like I'm experiencing my death, when all of a sudden consciousness came in, and I had the awakening or realization that there's something here right now that's experiencing a lot of different lifetimes. So something didn't die. There's something that experienced all of this that transcends death. There's something here that I've never fully like grokked or understood or embodied before, that isn't born and doesn't die. That's always has been and always will be. And it was this incredibly powerful moment where I realized that nothing in this material world, no possession, no relationship, nothing actually matters, because I'm infinite, and I always have been, and I ever will be, and I always will be. And everything is temporary except the part of me which really isn't me, the part of me which is all that is, that is experiencing everything all the time. It was a very powerful moment.
Wow, that is an amazing story. And what I love so much about it is it's so in sync with all the near-death experiencers that I talk to that actually leave their physical body, and you know, they're in this other realm. And that's one of the things that they say over and over and over, is that nothing here matters. Like they look at their body and it's like, oh, it's like an old shoe that just came off, you know?
Right. Exactly.
And I mean, the only thing that actually draws them back generally is the love that they feel for their family, you know? And many times, if they're given a choice, they do come back because they feel the loss that their family is feeling for them. And so they don't want to, you know, leave that. But again, that's love, right? I mean, that's what brings all of this together. That's a form of love. Yeah.
My friend he was doing a film about people who had near-death experiences, and many of them, in fact, he said the most common thing that they experienced was that when they were given a choice, or when they were guided to come back, that they were told that the meaning of life is to love, which is what I teach about and what I teach people how to do. Like, it's easy to say that. Like any psychiatrist, psychologist would probably tell you, like, loving yourself fully is what everyone needs. But how do you do that? That's one of the things I teach. I wanted to share, you mentioned near-death experiences. Can I share something real quick?
Oh, please. Absolutely.
I have never had a near-death experience, but I do have kind of a funny and not so funny for me story about near-death experiences and me. I was in Sedona, and there's a particular vortex there that's not one of the common ones. That's hard to get to. You have to hike through the wilderness to get there. And every time I go there, and I've only been there alone, I have these radical, like most radical experiences of my life. And so the last time I went, I was hiking up there, and I'd had a lot of different, you know, really intense shamanic experiences. And I stopped near the top of this hike, and I was eating a snack. And as I was eating my snack, I kind of went unconscious for a minute and started just daydreaming, you know? And this is what I thought. I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have a near-death experience? All these people have a near-death experience, and when they come back from it, they have an appreciation for life and an understanding of death that's different than anybody else. And that would be really cool. Like, of course, if I lived, like not if I died, but if I lived. And then right in the middle of all these thoughts and fantasies, I realized, oh my God, I'm in a vortex that amplifies and accelerates awakening and transformation and manifestation. And I probably should not be thinking these thoughts. And I like quickly like stop thinking it, right? And I went back to eating my snack. And then I meditated a little bit more, and I heard that I was going to meet a master teacher at the top of this like cliff bluff, which was a very strange thing to think because no one's around. I never see anybody here. So I get to the top, and this cliff comes down again perpendicularly to the trail. And there's this spot that I'm guided to meditate in. But my inner guidance, which is something I teach about, told me not to meditate right now, to walk around the corner and check out the views. I really wanted to meditate, but I listened to my guidance. And my guidance has saved my life. And this is one of those times, I think. So I walked around the corner, and then I came back to the spot to meditate. And there was this 6-foot green Mojave, which is the most aggressive and dangerous rattlesnake in the world, in the spot that I would have been meditating, looking at me in strike pose and shaking its rattle, and not that far from me. And I was like, whoa. And so I like, had lots of fear and, all of that. And then I slowly backed away to a safe distance. And I just stood there sort of meditating with the snake. And I got really clearly, that's the master teacher. And you need to meditate with the snake. So I went a little further, safe distance away, and I sat down, closed my eyes to meditate. And when I closed my eyes, the snake was like in my face. It was like right there. And it was like, I am death, and you will now experience your death. And it just like, boom, I was gone. And I was like, the Hindus would say I was in samadhi. It's like, there's no personality, there's no me, there's nothing, there's just the void, emptiness, for I don't know how long, because there was no time and no space. And then when I came back out of it, I felt like I was dead for most of the rest of the day. So when I went down to the car, and I remember sitting in the car waiting for my friend who had gone hiking, and it was one of the strangest experiences of my life. I didn't feel like I existed. Like I wasn't sure if I actually died or not, and whether I really dreamed like that the snake didn't kill me or whatever. And as I walked around, I was like, wow, these people are still living. They're still living their lives. Like everything's still going on, and I'm not here anymore. It was really interesting, but it changed me.
Wow. That's incredible. And that's what I've heard that story many times from people that have had near-death experiences, that they go into that void. It's like a black velvet, nothingness, all oneness, expansiveness. I mean, it's so fascinating to me. And it's so cool that you had that experience. Like you said, you're thinking those thoughts in this vortex, and so it amplifies and expands.
That's why I do the retreats in these vortexes, because they're like places of instant manifestation, but you got to be careful what you want.
Well, that's exactly right. And I just wanted to mention, so I was just on the 7-day retreat with you, which was phenomenal. It was here in Maui, and we went to amazing sacred sites, and one of them had a cave that I went through, and it was a similar kind of death experience, because on the one side, it was me and my life right now. And so I was guided to pray at the beginning of the cave. And then I walked in, and there was a lot of fear around walking in. It was dark, and some of the other participants were in there and chanting. And so it was kind of this whole surreal experience just being in there, And at the other, it was almost like a tunnel. And at the other end, there was a small little light. And it was interesting because you had told me the day before, because I was having some other issues or whatever. And you're like, well, you're kind of, you're in a tunnel, and there's a light, like keep going, don't give up. And so then suddenly here I am in a tunnel with a light at the other end. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to start walking toward the light. And so the closer I get, it just gets bigger and bigger. And I'm like, I got to go out. It was almost like being born, it was like this birth canal. And there was a bunch of brambles and, kind of trees that were built up. And I'm like, I'm going. And so I fought my way through, and I got to the other side. And I'm telling you, when I got there, it was almost as though I had walked into a vortex on the other side, because it was magical. It was almost like Disneylandish kind of, I felt like there were fairies there, and just everything was sparkling and shiny and new. And it was like this awakening into a new world. And so anyway, I can highly attest that you know, the retreats that you do are phenomenal and magical. And again, I mean, I had trees talking to me. I had rocks talking to me. I had the most extraordinary experiences on the whole trip. So,
and you know,
so cool.
what I love about the vortexes that I take people to and the retreats the most is, of course, talking to rocks and trees is wonderful and experiencing alternate universes or realities. But the thing is that people walk into those places sometimes with like a terminal disease, and they walk out and it's gone, because these are the void. In quantum physics, they say there's an infinite number of parallel universes that are coexisting at the same time. So everything that we ever have been or ever could be is all existing right now. We can't step from one of those realities to the other in our 3D world, which is the dense, typical, logical, mind-based world that we live in. But these vortexes are not in that realm. They're in the multidimensional realms. And so in those realms, we can step from one reality to another in an instant. So when people come on my retreats and they go to these sacred sites, they often bring the thing that they've never been able to shift or change in their entire lives. And then they go into these spots and they come out and they go home and their whole life is different. So it's not just, you know, going and having some ahas or epiphanies or some experience with fairies, but it's like, you're completely different. Your whole life is like, you got a new career, you got a new partner, you got a new place you live, you feel completely confident when you used to feel insecure, you've got tons of money when you used to be, you know, poor and scarcity. It's like that kind of radical change happens in these spots.
Yeah. Well, and that's what it felt like for me going into that magical realm is, you know, this whole year has been kind of a interesting path for me, kind of like, okay, what's next? And just feeling like, you know, I don't know, but walking through that tunnel and walking to the other side, it's like I am completely renewed and refreshed and excited about, you know, what's to come. And so thank you for.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, let me pull a few cards and see what they say, if you're open to that.
For sure.
Excellent. Let's see. This is just such a cool. So it's going to be about you know, death and what yeah, which is so in alignment with everything. So the first card is always the blockage card, which is courage. And I think so many people are just so afraid of death, right? And they you know, they cower and it keeps people from embracing it. And even our whole society, I felt, is built to not be okay with death. You know, we try to separate it and take the dead bodies to sterile places where you're not allowed to, you know, go and bathe your loved one. And I mean, I've done a lot of I've done hospice training and then death doula training, where now I know how to take care of a dead body. And it's so magical. Like there's so much power to be with our dead, you know, people. And most people, when I tell them I do either hospice work or death doula work, they look at me with these big eyes and they're like scared, right? Because how can you do that? I mean, it's amazing you do that, but I could never do that. So courage, right? You need to, that's where everyone's blocked. The second card I pulled is strength, which is the action card. So, you know, everyone, you just need to, like, you know, man up, for lack of a better word, but just, you know, tap into the strength that we all have, that we're all, you know, capable of being able to deal with death. And that's, I feel like after my out of body experience and going to the other, you know, to this heavenly realm and coming back, I mean, my whole, you know, my dictate was to come back and shine light on death for people so that they're not afraid of it. And so it's all about having strength and just knowing that by facing your fears, like, it sets you free. And then the outcome card, which I love, is power, because then you have your power. And when you're afraid and you're, you know, just don't want to deal with it, you lose all power within your own life, and you're being run by your fear, rather, you know, the fear of death, rather than embracing your power and really taking it to the next level. So.
Absolutely. I love it. Nice cards.
That's awesome. Well, Magick, tell people where they can find you and what's going on with, you know, with where you're at.
Well, people can find me at www.sacredvoyages.com. That's my website. And you can also go on Facebook. I think it's Facebook.com/Sacred Voyages, and then the number 2 is the Facebook page. And what's going on with Sacred Voyages, of course, we do retreats like we've talked about. We have one coming up in Mount Shasta in July. If you're watching this podcast at a later time, this is 2019. And so July 2020 is when we have our next retreat in Mount Shasta. And I also do private custom retreats. So people come, we just set it up. Like, where would you like to go? Would you like to go to Sedona? Would you like to go to Mount Shasta? Would you like to go to Hawaii? I'm in those places a lot. And we do a retreat that can last anywhere from 1 day up to a week or even more. And we do a deep dive going into the sacred sites and doing the change and healing and transformational work there. I also do one-on-one coaching. So I do Skype sessions and phone sessions in which I really, it's like coaching, but with a mystical aspect to it because of all the different kahuna and shaman that I trained with. They taught me how to effectuate change through storytelling, through just being with someone. So usually when someone works with me, one session and whatever we worked on has like shifted radically, and then we're on to the next thing. Maybe 2 sessions, rarely 3 does it take to actually really shift something, and then we're on to the next thing. So I do that as well. You can also email at awaken@sacredvoyages.com. And the phone number is 877-SACRED-8.
Fantastic. Yes. And I can highly attest to your private coaching. I think it was last week we were on the phone, and because you were walking out in nature and you said all of a sudden this hawk just came like flying right at you, and, you know, and then took a right turn or whatever. And that's definitely been one of my power animals throughout my life. So, and again, I had so many shifts. It feels like we spoke a year ago and it was only, you know, a week ago. So
yeah, it's cool. I like to do the calls in nature because, like, when the hawk came, I said, Lisa, a hawk just flew right at me, which has never happened before. You know, things that happen when we're on our calls together usually have some meaning or significance. Does that mean anything to you? And you burst out into tears and said, oh yeah, the hawk is really meaningful to me. Or there was another time when this lady, we were on a call and she had her dead grandfather had come to her, her dead father had come to her in a dream the night before and told her she needed to contact her mother because somebody in the family was gravely ill and could die. Well, she hadn't talked to her mother in years. They were estranged and she did not want to call her mother. So in our session, we were talking about and trying to like dive into, well, how do we know if that was really your father and whether you should really call your mother? And if you do call your mother, how do we get through the blocks that are in the way of that? And a hawk flew up and landed in a tree. It's the only other time a hawk's been part of a call. It landed in a tree near us, and I didn't think much about it. But then a second hawk a few minutes later flew up and landed in another tree. And I said, okay, my inner guidance is telling me to tell you that these hawks have flown up. And she's like, oh my God, hawk was my father's favorite animal. He talked about hawks all the time. He had hawks on the house. He drew hawks. There were hawks everywhere. That means it was him. And so we knew it really was her father who had come to her. And then we got to spend the rest of the call on, okay, now we have to do some deep work into, you know, what's happening that you're not talking to your mother anymore, and how do we heal that, and how do we move through some of the different blocks that were there. She's best friends with her mom now. They talk every week because she did call her mom. Her brother did in fact have a tumor. So her dad did visit her from death.
Wow. That is a great story.
Mm-hmm.
That is so awesome.
Yeah.
I know you said you wanted to show us your altar, so this would be a good time as we're just about to wrap up the call.
You know, there's just like recommendations that, you know, sometimes people want to know, well, how do I work with death? And one of the ways is there was a society, part of the Ivy League schools, called the Skull and Crossbones Society. And I don't know much about them. All I know is that one of their practices was that they would have their initiates would have a closet in their house that would be filled with all kinds of items that reminded them of death. And they were to sit and meditate in front of that every day. For a variety of reasons, to meditate on impermanence, you know, to realize the preciousness of this moment, you know, all the different things that can come when we meditate on death. I actually bought a watch that you can still get online, I think. It's called the Ticker, Tikker. and I put in the actuarial table when my predicted date of death is, and this watch counts down and shows me how many days, weeks, and minutes and hours I have to live, and it's counting down every second, every moment. And I used to wear that watch, and it freaks people out, right? But it's like a constant reminder, oh yeah, there's only this moment, and this moment may not even be here, and I'm gonna go. And everything else, and that, this is only temporary, everything it reminds me of. So there's beautiful practices that you can employ. All right, I'm gonna stop my video so you don't get dizzy and show you my altar. I can talk while I move. But,
oh, there you go. Well, and most people are listening to this on the podcast, so they're not going to be able to see the altar, but maybe you can explain as you're going.
So the mala that I'm wearing is normally on the altar. So I will take it off and just sort of place it kind of on the altar, but not exactly the way it normally goes on the altar. And whoo, it fell. Okay, there we go. So it's hard to actually move around and keep these earphones in at the same time, but I'm going to try. Okay, here we go.
You're doing good.
So.
Oh, wow. Look at that. Yes.
So that's an exact replica of a human skull. And many people can't really tell the difference actually in person. So it can freak people out a bit. But yeah, that's my altar.
That is great. And then you've got, it looks like some feathers there and some crystals. And what else do you have there?
So those are turkey feathers, which can represent the giveaway, releasing the old, completion. There's the mala. There's a garland there, which also can be around death. There's other mala beads and different kinds of beads. There's a kukui nut lei, which represents the light, some crystals. There's a black tourmaline. There's a lot of different things there.
Wow. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Oops, are you still there?
Oh, I accidentally muted myself while I was on.
There you go. Oh, no worries, no worries. Okay, great. Wow. Well, Magick, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. And I feel like you just shared so much and people are going to really get a lot out of this. I'll have all of your links, of course, down below on my website so people can find you if they didn't jot down the information that you shared. And
oh, you know what? There's one other thing people might like. I do a monthly talk called Magick Talks, which is free. It's kind of like this, except it's just me. And in it, I'm actually transmitting the energy of whatever it is that I'm talking about. And it often really affects people. Like I tell people, don't drive, don't operate heavy machinery. People have visions and epiphanies and ahas and all kinds of experiences. And one of the talks recently was about death. And so if people are interested, when you go to the website, sacredvoyages.com, click on free stuff, and then click on Magick Talks, and then archived Magick Talks, and look for the one that's about death. And I think it's probably over an hour of deep transmission about energy of death and awakening, and it's quite potent. So your audience might really like that.
Yes, thank you. That's amazing. And well, again, thank you so much for your time. And I can't wait till I see you again in person.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. And thank everybody who's been listening. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Exploring Death podcast. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Before you make any financial or legal decisions, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Exploring Death. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.